The banning of weapons in war isn't exactly a common thing to occur. Famously, the Germans tried to ban the use of trench guns during the First World War. But over 700 years before this, Pope Innocent II outlawed the use of crossbows. Which raises the question, why? Why were crossbows specifically banned, and why did it require the Pope to do so? So it won't surprise you to know that the 12th century Christian world was not a harmonious one. Crusading was one way to temporarily keep the peace between some of these nations. But as soon as these were over, it was back to fighting. The papacy hated the idea of Christians killing each other. And one way in particular that irked the Pope was the use of missile weapons, particularly crossbows. As such, it was time to hold a council. The Second Lateran Council. Now, the thing to remember is that this council wasn't called just for the purpose of banning crossbows. That was only a small part of a much broader agenda. Now, there's a commonly held belief that the papacy was concerned that the use of crossbows would uproot the medieval social order, the idea being that it allowed barely trained peasants to kill armoured knights and their lords. This, however, wasn't the case. Nobody had this concern, and in fact many nobles and kings brought loads of crossbows for their own armies, because it actually made it more likely that their rivals would be killed instead. So the Pope was primarily concerned with ranged weapons, making it much easier for Christians to kill each other. That's not to say that using an axe was somehow better, but the belief was that ranged weapons made casualties much higher and would lead to more Christian deaths, which is of course why you were free to use them whilst crusading against pagans or Muslims. And the punishment for violating this law was excommunication. The problem with this is that it wasn't entirely clear if that applied to the person doing the shooting themselves or to the lord that hired them. So was this ban ever actually enforced? No. The papacy was the only authority that all Catholic rulers would listen to, and in spite of the Pope's technical supremacy over the earthly princes, that didn't mean that they had to obey him. Throughout the Middle Ages, the papacy issued a lot of bans that were entirely ignored. Jousting was seen as a senseless waste of life, it kept happening. Wars weren't supposed to take place on weekends, they did, and kings were supposed to acknowledge the Pope outranking them, they did not. The fact is, no self-respecting Christian ruler would put themselves at a military disadvantage by getting rid of missile weapons. As such, the papal ban on crossbows was little more than the Pope shouting into the void. I hope you enjoyed this episode, with a special thanks to my patrons: James Bizanet, Kelly Moneymaker, Sky Chappelle, Katoitska, Yuduan Wang, Anthony Beckett, Marcus Arsner, Rod D. Martin, YN Hockey, AF Firefly, Spencer Lightfoot, Gustav Swan, Captain Psydog, Alex Schwinn, Shuenin, The McWhopper, Marvin Cassow, Spinning 3 Plates, Andy McGeehee, Copper Tone, Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard, Maggie Patskowski, Kamoon Yoon, Winston Kaywood, Jim Stromberg, Remco Hoosman, Miss Izette, Charles I, and Words About Books podcast.